Slop director Uwe Boll finally has an audience of conservatives desperate for action films.
Sea of crap movies that push a bunch of nonsense with agendas and propaganda.
Brainwashing, completely bullshit.
Uwe Boll decided to say it and make an unhinged movie about what so many people know is true. Citizen Vigilante has got to be this year's most bold masterpiece from Uwe Boll, and I don't say that lightly, cause you gotta have some serious nuts that make a film tackling real-world issues.
Citizen Vigilante is Uwe Boll's newest film. Elon Musk wants you to watch it so desperately, he posted the whole movie on Twitter while it was still in theaters. You know, film piracy is always a great way of getting the word out that the film exists, right? Every time a conservative, pro-American film drops, the biggest names in conservative media will rush to insist this film is some landmark. A real refuge from the woke Hollywood slop that's slobbering on our screens. You know, like Obsession.
No, don't do it!
Don't watch Supergirl, watch Citizen Vigilante. Citizen Vigilante has over 90% on Rotten Tomatoes audience score. The critic score is, not 94%. Could it be that Hollywood doesn't want the word to get around about this intense film that's been banned in Germany? Well, maybe. Or perhaps the only people who actually care about this film are political commentators, not audiences. After all, why wouldn't you want to see an action film about... What's this film about again exactly? Citizen Vigilante is about a US Army guy who moves to Europe to inherit a real estate business, and he becomes the Citizen Vigilante, fighting bad guys in the streets that the cops won't put away.
Men who did this to you, what do you want to happen to them?
I want them to go to jail.
And they might. Of course, we won't know till the end of a trial. And that could take years. Then we'll also have to get lucky with the judgment. You never know how those things are going to turn out.
Now, if that sounds like The Punisher, Batman, The Crow, any action film for the last 40 years, then yeah, you'd be right. But what's different here is that the guy primarily targets migrant criminals in Europe.
You mentioned it's not about religion or Islam. Well, then why did you include dialogue in the film where the father of the rapist tries to justify it by citing the Quran? Why does the protagonist talk about Islamists taking over Europe? I think it's a little bit disingenuous to say it's not about Islam when it very much is when you watch the film.
Which ties into conspiracy theories about migrants causing crime throughout Europe.
It is indisputable that there are many people around Europe who do feel that way, right? It's indisputable. You may shake your head, but it is a fact. But a lot of people in the UK, we see 100,000 people
let me say my point.
turn up in London for Tommy Robinson. So it is undeniable that people are feeling that way. I think the numbers are massively exaggerated, and this concept, which Americans in particular seem to have, that we've been overrun by Muslims in the UK is preposterous.
That's why conservatives like this film, because migrants are the bad guys. And you know this is why, because people don't actually talk about the film outside the politics. So what's it to actually recommend about the film? The characters, the plot, the action? No, it's the politics, and it offends the woke left. That's it.
Objectively, it's not a well-done film, but the message is bold, and the message resonates with people. It's a man who goes out and basically starts righting the wrongs, delivering justice to migrants who are committing crimes, raping, killing, the people Europeans are tired of as their representation turns a blind eye. And
I think all the babble about this film is secondary to one key factor. People would rather talk about Supergirl than watch Citizen Vigilante. Take The Critical Drinker, one of the big right-wing critics on YouTube. He has 0 videos on Citizen Vigilante on his main channel, but multiple ones on Supergirl, and 4 videos about Supergirl on his side channel, 2 about Spider-Man Brand New Day, and 0. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry, there's one right there, about Citizen Vigilante. The drinker would rather talk about superhero films he hates than celebrate something on his side. That's remarkably similar to the quality of his own filmmaking. I mean, really, look at some of those videos talking about Supergirl. That has more views than I think Citizen Vigilante has on Amazon. Supergirl was a financial flop, yeah, but a flop still has more cultural impact than this second coming of conservative media. Despite what people want it to be, Citizen Vigilante is just another action film, and not a particularly good one either. derivative of ones from the 70s and 80s. But all this really begs a question. Why aren't these conservative films blowing up more? After all, this decade has been defined by an uprising of conservative voters and audiences. They voted in Trump. Surely they can afford to watch a barrage of films like this, right? And if not Citizen Vigilante, then any of the Daily Wire's various films. By the way, the footage I'm showing right now, it's not even from Citizen Vigilante or the Daily Wire films. This is still the Critical Drinkers movie. I bet you couldn't even tell the difference. They all look the fucking same. One of the first Daily Wire films was a movie called Run, Hide, Fight, which was basically a school shooter movie in the style of Die Hard. You know, because that's not at all tasteless. The film was put on the Daily Wire streaming service, which, considering Daily Wire is now a ghost town, kind of shows how many people watched it. But don't worry, I guess it was successful enough to have a sequel starring Jonathan Majors. I'm seeing a pattern with the actors chosen for these movies. I'm sure that Pendragon series is getting all the views right now. Well, the reality is no. And there's a very simple reason why none of these movies are getting the financial success that these conservative directors and producers seem to believe it should. Shit's expensive, man. Why would someone spend their money to watch your shit when they can watch generic slop on Netflix they've seen a million times already? If your film is derivative of Death Wish, what's stopping people from just watching Death Wish again? There's like 5 of them. Conservative voters are, by and large, from many of the states that are among the poorest in the country. While there are some extremely rich conservatives, the vast majority are below the poverty line because all of Americans are suffering right now under capitalism. And when it comes to action, people have been burned so many times by underwhelming action films that they'd rather just wait for it to come on Netflix or just watch something on Netflix. People aren't going to go to the movie theater without something with brand recognition, on average anyway. The only genre that's really dependable, where audiences are willing to give a new IP a chance, is horror. That's why stuff like Obsession, Sinners, The Backrooms, The Backrooms is part of an IP, of course. It pops off when it comes out because horror fans show the fuck up. The Substance being a huge hit because horror fans show up. Action fans? Not necessarily. Especially when your film looks like something they've seen before. Many people point to John Wick as a modern resurgence of action films, but John Wick was not an overnight hit. It was a humble hit upon release, the first one anyway. At a budget of $30 million, it grossed $86 million. John Wick, though, became a mega franchise through word of mouth and sequels, establishing an IP that audiences could come back to. And really, the biggest success it had was when it hit streaming, and the average person could watch it. But John Wick's biggest claim to fame at the time was it was a moderately budgeted action film in an era where budgets were inflating to absurd degrees. In a field of $200 million budget films, a movie that cost so little was good. And by the way, $30 million is the high estimate of what John Wick cost. It might have cost far less, especially with tax rebates and all that. But Citizen Vigilante, how much does that cost? I'm sure actual Cannibal Armie Hammer doesn't take up that much money, right? He's kind of desperate for work, I think, at this point. Citizen Vigilante's budget is estimated to be $2 million, though some people have estimates ranging from $750,000 to $9 million. It's very unclear. This puts it on par with Run, Hide, Fight's budget, which was approximately $1.5 million as well. Because both are direct to streaming and have limited VOD release, it's hard to gauge the exact amount of money these films brought in. But people have definitely thrown around random number figures. It's this huge mega success in the face of woke Hollywood. But the film came out on VOD, so the question is, how do we gauge the amount of money it earned? It also doesn't hurt that several films, like say conservative darling The Sound of Freedom, got its bigger box office returns because the Studio Angel Studios that distributed Sound of Freedom encouraged audiences to pay it forward, that individual patrons could buy multiple tickets in advance for other people to view, like say on a church trip or a senior citizen day, so that they could give the gift of the film to others. That's become Angel Studios' model of success, which has shown its fruits in such classics as Animal Farm.
What does that say?
Laughter House!
That sounds awesome. I love to laugh.
Why are you the way that you are?
With Citizen Vigilante being released on VOD, that means any number of people could just bought out a bunch of receipts for it, you know? It could be astroturfed to hell and back by certain people who want to encourage this film to be a success. That happens with a lot of right-wing books, too. There's tons of records of right-wing books from right-wing pundits being bought out in bulk and reaching the top of the New York Times bestseller list for a week before dropping off. Because people don't actually care about these books, but the right-wing media wants to prop up these works to present them as some mega hit. To give the impression of success, they force success. But this success comes at the price of a lack of a cultural footprint. You can always tell these films are astroturfed because the moment after the first week or whatever, these films drop off and no one gives a shit. The discussion about Supergirl has completely eclipsed Citizen Vigilante, despite the fact that Supergirl flopped. So what's the fucking point here? I find it kind of crazy that Uwe Boll, of all people, after being the enemy of video game fans for decades, has now been accepted in a post-Gamergate right-wing cesspool. Uwe Boll was the ultimate slop director before slop was even a word, pumping out films left and right, taking advantage of certain German tax laws, so that despite the films all being flops, he still walked away with a lot of money. But Uwe Boll has always had right-wing sensibilities. His film Postal had a lot of anti-Islamic jokes in it. It had a lot of culturally insensitive jokes, but again, it's Postal. You kind of expect that. The problem is Postal is funny, the game. This movie was not funny. That's the biggest problem it has. You can make offensive jokes all you want, but if you're not funny, you're not funny, you know? But Citizen Vigilante is a little different. It's not based on a video game. It's essentially a remake of sorts of Death Wish, or a throwback to those grittier action films from the 70s, like Death Wish. Uwe Boll claims that a real court case inspired Citizen Vigilante, a Hamburg case in 2016, but the reality simply is that kind of taking a real-life case where justice was not done properly to inspire your revenge fantasy film feels tasteless and kind of bullshit. It's why movies like Run, Hide, Fight are so bad too, because you're taking a real-life tragedy where people actually were hurt and you're exploiting it for slop. You're not really saying anything about the actual incident, it's just revenge fantasy, which is cheap and kind of juvenile and kind of distasteful to the people who actually survived these incidents. But ignore the fact that Death Wish already has a remake that already got forgotten when it came out and was very right-wing and conservative, because this is the new Death Wish. When Eli Roth's remake of Death Wish did come out, there was a lot of audience fanfare but critical backlash. And at the time, a lot of right-wing critics were saying that the reason that the critics didn't like it was because the film was too right-wing for them, that it reflected the reality of day-to-day life as it is.
In the past, there were a few things that we could all agree on. The sky is blue, socialism doesn't work, and Die Hard is the greatest movie ever made. However, the left in recent years has abandoned objective truth for subjective, narcissistic, selfish screeching of, "I feel, so I should get." And nothing I've seen shows this more clearly than the reviews for Death Wish starring Bruce Willis. A movie so manly, so in line with actual conflict, so action-packed, so perfect in its toxic masculinity that it literally combines AC/DC, Milton Friedman, home defense with assault rifles, and condemns Chicago for not being able to protect its citizens. Oh my god, I can just see every leftist just cringing watching this movie.
But I don't think that's really the case. For the record, I think this remake is better than the original. We'll get to that more later. But it's also just stuff I've seen before done better elsewhere. The film has not retained an audience of anyone in the years since it came out, which I think is the same fate awaiting Citizen Vigilante, as well as The Sound of Freedom, which already happened kind of The Sound of Freedom already, and there's a key reason for that. They try this every couple of years to bring it back, but the problem is when they bring it back, you have to actually do something people want to see. People don't want to really see Death Wish, because quite frankly, it's going to take a lot of heat for this one. Death Wish kind of sucks. It's kind of babyish, I'm being honest with you. Like, yeah, it's violent, but the film doesn't really have much of a depth to it. It's kind of bland, surface level bullshit. You got Jeff Goldblum assaulting Charles Bronson's wife. And it's like, oh, you're on board now with Charles Bronson because his wife just got assaulted.
My name is Paul Curtesy. How's my wife? I'm sorry. She died a few minutes ago, Mr. Curtesy.
And now he sees every hoodlum around. He's going to take him out. But he doesn't take out Jeff Goldblum. Why? I know it gets Jeff Goldblum in the sequel, but like, it's unsatisfying as a film. You set up a revenge film, but there's no revenge. You just get a vigilante film. With most Punisher stories, the Punisher's family also gets gunned down in a gang war. Ultimately, the Punisher is a Death Wish-like character. But the problem is the Punisher is crazy and extreme, and the other heroes treat him as crazy and extreme. Charles Bronson's character in Death Wish, he's just a vigilante. He's a hero. It's like an old Western story where John Wayne comes out and shoots the bad guys, except it's the modern day. One other thing too, the cops in Death Wish are kind of incompetent. They're simultaneously the good guys, but can't stop crime. They go to Charles Bronson's character in the movie, gets caught in the hospital, and they say, you better not do your vigilante bullshit in their city, and so the movie ends with them going to a different city and continuing the same shit there. And it's like, okay, that's not, doesn't really resolve anything. Is all this build up for conflict and none of it gets resolved. You just kind of see Charles Bronson gun down bad guys again and again and again and again. And none of the action scenes are particularly compelling or thrilling. It's not the French Connection, which came around at the same time, so we could do good action scenes at that time, good car chase scenes. It's just kind of slop. It feels like slop, honestly. And there are better films from that era that did action much better. Like Star Wars, for example, which came out a couple years after Death Wish. And by the way, the Death Wish sequels, it's just Charles Bronson does the same thing again and again and again, but gets progressively older and sadder.
Charles Bronson is back.
I'm coming for you, O'Shea.
And this time, he's not leaving until his wish is their command.
I always compare Death Wish in my head to a very similar film from the era that I think is a lot better. The Last House on the Left. Hang on with me for a second, I'll explain this one.
Because we had gone to see one of those Man with No Name Clint Eastwood movies, and by actual count, I think there were something like 300 dead bodies. And, armed with that sort of philosophical orientation to peace and love, flower children went out to make this violent film.
That film, I think, is a far more mature mediation on violence and a far more disturbing film than Death Wish.
The Last House on the Left. To avoid fainting, keep repeating. It's only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie.
Wes Craven's debut film shows a bunch of escaped criminals who assault and murder two girls on their way to some stoner concert. Like in Death Wish, the cops are incompetent and unable to handle the crime. The only difference is, in Last House, you get annoyed at the cops along with everyone else. They feel like they walked in from a different movie, and that makes it more frustrating watching them bumble around on the outskirts of the story while actual horror happens in front of you. Some people draw this as a fault in the film. I think it's actually a strength, because it reminds you how incompetent law enforcement are and how indifferent they are to the struggles of people as true violence happens, in some cases, mere yards away from the cops bumbling around. So anyway, these two girls are assaulted and murdered horribly. It's brutal, it's disturbing. But after the murder, the criminals stay at a bed and breakfast. And that bed and breakfast is run by the family of one of the girls they just killed. Unlike Death Wish, which has one briefly but disturbing scene where the crime happens against the wife, half the movie of Last House focuses on this cruel murder.
We filmed that, I remember, in one morning, and when it was all over, we broke for lunch. Everybody was covered with artificial blood, and I just remember everybody went off by themselves, and nobody ate.
You really are broken down by what you see. It's drawn out, and you really want to see justice done to these horrible, vile characters, who you then spend more time with. So you're stuck with these admittedly human monsters. You want to see justice done, and then justice gets done. The revenge scene in Last House is spectacular. It's brutal, it's disturbing, it's violent and brutal. But when the movie ends, the characters are crying. The cops arrive too late to stop the criminals, but just in time to witness the parents murdering people in their house. And the parents collapse in a heap because now their revenge is over, but their daughter is still dead. They have to live with that and contend with the consequences of their own actions, which could be legal consequences. Even though they did the right thing in theory, the cops are still going to bring them to jail because they did just murder like 3 or 4 people. Death Wish is a playground film. Craven's film is a mediation.
In such a simple story, encapsulate kind of so much of the human condition about violence coming out of people that you never think it could come out of, or nations.
It became a sort of political statement about the nature of repressed violence in American society.
And Last House has far more of a cultural impact than Death Wish. That same structure Craven used, it was incorporated into his follow-up, The Hills Have Eyes, a classic of horror, as well as other films, including the controversial I Spit on Your Grave, which is one of the best revenge films of that era and deeply disturbing as well, also spending a lot of time with the crime itself and the calculated revenge against those who commit it. As for Death Wish, it existed almost to be immediately countered by better action films, like First Blood. First Blood is one of the greatest action films of all time, primarily because it's about something. You see, a film that's about something tends to have more of a cultural impact. It's part of the conversation discussion that we have. Rambo is a Vietnam Green Beret who comes home from war to find everyone he's served with is dead, basically. He doesn't fit into the American society he defended anymore, and is attacked by, of all people, the cops. They harass him, a veteran, and treat him cruelly. This triggers Rambo's PTSD, and he unleashes a single, focused confrontation against the cops, using the terrain of the area against them. But noticeably, Rambo is a reactive figure. He reacts to society's cruelty, and most of the damage that he inflicts is defensive. There's only one casualty in the film, and it's not really Rambo's fault. It's more their pursuit of Rambo drives them to essentially destroy themselves. Ultimately, the film ends with Rambo's former commanding officer coming in to talk Rambo down after he's humiliated the local sheriff in a cruel fashion. And the speech Rambo gives is genuinely one of the most painful scenes in the film as you tear away the layers of this character, seeing how he has struggled to reintegrate into society, the fears and pain he has that people just don't even try to address, the cost of defending freedom.
Back there I could fly a gunship. I could drive a tank. I was in charge of $1 million equipment. Back here I can't even hold a job. Fucking cars! Ah!
In this sense, it's hard to see if First Blood is a very conservative film about saying the troops are great, or a very leftist film, criticizing the military complex for its failure to treat soldiers after they've come back, and the failure of mainstream society of accepting these soldiers who have been traumatized and have been forced to do things for the American government that hurt them deeply. The politics are complex, and that discussion around the film makes the film have a lasting power. And then the sequels come out. First Blood goes farther to criticize America than any modern blockbuster, but then the sequels immediately become pro-American military propaganda. First Blood is seen as a great movie due to its mature ideas, blended with gritty, intense action. The sequels are remembered for their over-the-top action sequences, and for being really fucking stupid. Fun, but stupid. Rambo 3 has the same fan base as Red Dawn, essentially. Films anchored to the Cold War in a general action-packed way. Movies like James Bond were also anchored to the Cold War, but over time broke away from that. Goldeneye has an entire sequence at the beginning discussing how James Bond is still relevant in a post-Cold War world.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War.
If Bond's able to survive the Cold War by adapting, Rambo didn't. Until we had another military conflict in the 2000s, Rambo was kind of a joke. And even then, he came back briefly for a film, and that film inspired confidence in Stallone to make more films like The Expendables, which have become a joke. The point here with this comparison, though, is that the good films that deal with violence intelligently, yet still talk about political issues, are able to humanize the targets of violence as well, which makes the violence more impactful. They're able to humanize the characters enacting the violence, which makes it more impactful as well. Citizen Vigilante does neither, which is why it's a shitty film. One interesting thing when you go back to these older films, you realize how incompetent and corrupt all the police are in these films. In modern blockbusters, even when the police are corrupt, it's always a good cop. In every Batman film, Commissioner Gordon is the good cop, the only one Batman can trust. And even then, such as in The Batman, it still emphasizes that despite there being corrupt cops, some cops are still good and are willing to defend justice. We have to defend the police because it's not all cops, right? But First Blood, Last House on the Left, the cops are either bullies with badges or utterly incompetent. Death Wish grossed under $50 million in the mid-70s. That's a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But a couple years later, Smokey and the Bandit grossed over $126 million. Some recent estimates even place it at over $300 million when all international sales are said and done. Death Wish was never the big hit that conservatives looking back wanted to make it sound like. And by the way, who are the bad guys in Smokey and the Bandit? Oh, right, the cops. Right. And are they intelligent? No, they're stupid, of course. The 70s had a real anti-authoritarian mindset throughout it. The real villain of Jaws isn't the shark, it's the mayor who is willing to allow the beaches to be open if it means a profit for the city. The Godfather shows cops as an extension of the mob, where a police chief is essentially in the mafia's pocket. But the problem isn't ethical when Michael Corleone says he can kill this chief. It's PR. You have to set up some groundwork before you do something like that. And thankfully, the Corleones own the papers. In The Terminator, cops are helpless against the Terminator. The T-800 guns them all down in a spectacular sequence. And when we get to the T-2, the T-1000 disguises itself as what? A cop.
Hasta la vista, baby.
This, of course, harkens back to older films as well. Back in Psycho, the cop is presented as a figure of fear, more overtly frightening than even the Bates Motel in that one sequence where Marion Crane wakes up and sees a cop sitting outside of her window. Die Hard's an odd example, though. John McClane is the hero. He is an off-duty New York City cop who manages to barely survive and emerge on top of a terrorist attack on a building, despite the efforts of foreign terrorists and the idiocy of cop bureaucracy and the FBI. The film is both anti-authoritarian, but also conservative. The good guys are all cops, but the biggest hurdles they face outside of terrorists are also the cops. But it's the bureaucracy, the higher-up guys, the guys who are detached from the ground, who are in their ivory towers, not really looking at what the situation entails and not willing to listen to the blue-collar worker on the ground level. One of the key elements of the terrorist plot is they want to get into a safe that contains money, but the safe has electric locks on it. It's a good thing the FBI is going to cut power to the building, which will disable the electric locks and allow them to get the money. So the FBI is actually accountable for helping the terrorists due to their own incompetence. Lone cops can be heroes, like Dirty Harry, if the authorities just stop being such ass pains. But that doesn't really fly anymore, does it? The Die Hard series got progressively worse the less anti-authority the series became. Die Hard with a Vengeance, while a good sequel, depicts the cops as all on the same side, all working together to stop crime. Come, Live Free or Die Hard, or It's a Good Day to Die Hard, the cops become overt superheroes, and the films are, as a result, far less impactful, far less gritty, and far less anchored to the human story of the original. You know, the whole thing that made it successful. This is what many Die Hard clones fail to get. It's not about being a hero or fighting the bad guys. It's about being a complete underdog. The authorities can't stand you. You're outgunned. You have nothing on your side. And at the same time, you're gradually bleeding out because you didn't put your fucking shoes on. The trope of the aggressive but incompetent boss cop, it kind of faded away over time. Beverly Hills Cop has bureaucracy that's incompetent or detached, and we see how in Beverly Hills, the bureaucracy of the cops serves to benefit those in power, that being the rich. And it's only when cops break those rules that they're able to actually do justice. Cops being encouraged to break rules, that sounds like a recipe for danger, if I'm going to be honest with you. The Dirty Harry movies are all about a lone cop on the edge, doing what needs to be done for justice, and ultimately killing a lot of people in the process, because everyone the cop fights is bad. But equally relevant is the humanization of the protagonist in Die Hard. That applies to other great action films, like First Blood or Predator.
You son of a bitch.
Dutch and his squad of badasses are human. They're not really heroes, but they're humanized. But the military sees them as expendable assets. But then the film shows us these guys being picked off one by an alien presence, being dehumanized by the villain of the movie. They're just trophies. And that kind of illustrates how these powerful soldiers of war are vulnerable to this alien presence. Ultimately speaking, The Predator is a slasher film disguised as an action film. Because the action heroes are not indestructible, scenes involving them in peril feel intense. All their weaponry, and they can't stop this alien presence. By the time Schwarzenegger squares off with the Predator, you feel there's a chance he might lose. And that adds tension to scenes. It's not just an endless repeating cycle of shoot bad guy, kill bad guy. There's tension. and that's good. That's the problem too. Heroes used to be able to bleed or die. Death Wish shows Charles Bronson as vulnerable. Rambo 3, The Expendables, not so much. They're indestructible. Nowadays, when a Rock's in the action film, he has to take fewer punches than the guy he punches back. Oh, and don't you dare make the person watching the film actually think. Action films aren't meant to make you think. They're meant to be enjoyable, fun, slop. Is it any wonder that Uwe Boll's throwback to Death Wish is getting popular among conservative audiences when the reality simply is they are asking to not think? But unlike Die Hard or Death Wish, Citizen Vigilante is just as much against the cops and the judges as it is against migrants. Armie Hammer's character puts cops in hospitals. He attacks judges just as much as he attacks the criminals because the judges are responsible for this misstep in power. He is ultimately all about rejecting the government entirely to replace it with a vigilante police state, one where even the police are not extreme enough. Because apparently, the police not going on murderous fascist rampages is woke, apparently. This reflects, I think, the modern conservative mindset after January 6th, where violent insurrection is an acceptable response to a government not doing every little thing you want. You ignore the fact that there is reason why certain institutions do not hammer down on the people you think are criminals as hard as you'd like. Vigilante justice is often a simple word for acting without actually investigating. At no point does this vigilante actually investigate. He's basically told someone did a crime, he goes and stops the people who he thinks did a crime, and then moves on. Who's to say they're right? But also, there's another problem. The reason this film feels so generic is because there are a lot of films like it, conservative action films that don't require you to think all too much. Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV, there are a load of films, many of which are produced by Skydance Studios. Skydance is run by David Ellison, who now owns Paramount and will soon own Warner Brothers, and he makes a bunch of slop films for various studios. They go on Netflix and all that. He's also made Top Gun, he's made Annihilation, but a lot of what he makes is slop, essentially. Conservatives will argue that Hollywood is run by these liberal elites, but David Ellison, a noted conservative, is now about to own basically half of Hollywood. The half that Disney doesn't own, anyway. And let's not make any mistake, Disney's not exactly a bastion of liberal media either. Whenever they throw a bone towards the left, it's usually exploitative. They forced multiple productions to annex gay characters, most notably Elio, a film that was basically hacked to pieces in editing because the idea of its focusing on a young queer boy was deemed too controversial for Disney brass. Disney and the Ellisons are known for stepping in creatively, and because of that, we are seeing a shrinking of different films outside the circles that people want to see. The problem is that the critics on the right would rather criticize films they perceive as leftist as opposed to actually watch movies made with them in mind. Supergirl, again, has created a small micro-industry of conservative reactionaries who'd rather talk about that than praise Citizen Vigilante. Yeah, sure, a lot of these guys have praised Citizen Vigilante, but they've made multiple films about Supergirl. The reason being is that there's more to talk about with Supergirl. There's more to discuss. With Citizen Vigilante, all you can really say is, oh, it's the film the woke Hollywood types won't make. And then no one talks about it.
Oh my god, I can just see every leftist just cringing watching this movie.
Maybe the reason why the woke Hollywood types aren't making Citizen Vigilante is because the film sucks. With many of the films that get sent to Netflix or Amazon, what have you, they're action films that were bought out by a studio, but then sold off to someone else because the film script or something about the film didn't satisfy the standards they had in mind.
The Tomorrow War was also produced as a Paramount movie, and after it was finished, they sold it to Amazon for $200 million to be released on Prime Video. Universal won a bidding war for Red Notice, but when they received the screenplay, they, according to Forbes, seemed hesitant, probably because the script sucks, and so Netflix gladly took on the project. The same thing happened with The Electric State. Universal had the project, started to grow concerned as it was developing, and once again, Netflix swooped in to take it.
They're films that are underwhelming on some level. Not all films, but many films. The action films especially, the big budget ones, because The studios know these action films when put into theaters won't make a profit back. But what's ultimately the point here? Why does any of this ultimately matter? If Citizen Vigilante exists, who cares? Conservatives should have their films, right? If they really want to see a film that appeals to the sensibilities made, they should make it. The problem is the narrative around Citizen Vigilante. It's not exceptional for doing what it does, because the film is not particularly exceptional. It's a by-the-numbers generic action film with certain key political points added on.
You mentioned it's not about religion or Islam. Well, then why did you include dialogue in the film where the father of the rapist tries to justify it by citing the Quran? Why does the protagonist talk about Islamists taking over Europe? I think it's a little bit disingenuous to say it's not about Islam when it very much is when you watch the film.
Dragged Across Concrete was also a conservative movie, but that was better made at least. Yeah, it was highly controversial, Mel Gibson and all that, but it was also more competently made than Citizen Vigilante, because Uwe Boll's a shit director. That's the big problem. Uwe Boll is not talented enough to make a film that's sophisticated and good, or have action pieces that are actually entertaining. The film is being astroturfed by conservatives, but the fact that no one outside of the big conservative names are talking about it kind of proves the film has no lasting power. Is it without merit? Yeah. It kind of is, actually. There's not much to talk about with this film. I set out to write a review of Citizen Vigilante, but having seen it, I have nothing to say about it beyond the politics of the film, because the only thing that matters is the film's politics. To be as offensive to one party as possible, and as pandering to another party as possible. That's not particularly a good film, though. I would criticize left films for the same concept. After Get Out came out, for example, there were many horror films that tried to pander to the messages that Get Out effortlessly balanced out. But the problem is, Get Out was a good movie. There are a lot of other films that take imagery associated with racism, plug it into a horror film, and think, oh, it's just like what Get Out did, except no, it's not actually. There's more to Get Out than just, it's a film criticizing racism. It was a well-structured thriller that balanced out the fear gradually and included some social commentary woven into the fabric of the plot. If your plot has to stop to bring forward the message of your film, the message is not organically woven into your film all that well. It has to be integrated effectively to be communicated effectively. In the case of Get Out, that's done. In many other films' cases and TV shows' cases, not so much. But if the people talking about Citizen Vigilante are just talking about the fact that there's a guy who attacks migrants, then what's the point here? Why are people promoting it? Well, simple. To spread conspiracy theories, to make you afraid of migrants, taking theories that already exist in conservative spaces and trying to solidify them through visuals and material.
I'm here to help you take that control back. I'm here to show you that you are no longer the victims. I'm here to show you that it's time to go out and show these fuckers that they aren't getting away with it anymore.
Therefore, the film has no merits as a film. It is just propaganda designed to make you afraid of people who are different from you, meant to promote great replacement theory, and meant to promote violence in some fashion.
I do this for you, until you learn to do it for yourself.
Citizen Vigilante is just like that. It is pandering. If you remove mention of these topics from the film is no different than Death Wish. It's the same plot structure, same character beats, same moments. It's not really a sophisticated film in its own senses. It's not really a film in its own senses. It's slop. Formulaic, boring slop. And Wright loves nothing more than things that fit a certain formula. Fortunately, that means that we have to now humor them and pretend that these movies are in fact being canceled because they're anti-woke and not because they're just not good films. The right can make good action films. I've discussed several in this video. Die Hard is one of the greatest action films of all time. It's definitely a conservative movie. You can make a good conservative action film. The problem is you're just not. And the problem also is that you're pretending that conservative action films are rare nowadays when it's the slop that ends up on Netflix because the studios know you guys aren't going to come out to these films if they put them out normally. But listen, fellas, If you want an action film about a military guy kicking out invading migrants to a country, don't worry, Sisu has a sequel coming out. And the only way you can hate Sisu, which is basically just World War II John Wick, is if you think the Nazis are sympathetic.
To avoid fainting, keep repeating.
It's only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie.
Take as much as you can.
Only a movie.